If you want to help Myth Vision Podcast grow, you can join our Patreon. There are different tiers, as well as help out with PayPal. Thank you so much. Don't forget to like, subscribe, share, and comment. I snapped this picture from a Facebook group I'll leave unnamed, but I must say it caught my attention, and it has your name involved. It says, well, Dr. Bob deserves to check it out. I will say this is a historicist group, which automatically puts you in the hot seat, baby. Ben Evan asks, or says, he said, I wanted to share the intro to Dunn's hilarious response to Price in the Historical Jesus 5 Views. Response to Robert M. Price, James D.G. Dunn. I'm going to read what I have in the image, and after that, bear with me, ladies and gentlemen. You know, I just want you to comment on it, if you would. And this is, I wish I had the page in front of me. We could really read the chapter, the page, whatever. He starts it out like this. Gosh. So, there are still serious scholars who put forward the view that the whole account of Jesus' doings and teachings are a later myth foisted on an unknown, obscure historical figure. The author Drew's and G.A. Wells' versions have been responded to sufficiently. One would have thought, but no! Exclamation point. Robert Price raises the banner once again. It is quite likely that there never was any historical Jesus. Your quotes, or quotation marks. The term historical Jesus being used once again for an actual historical figure rather than the historian's reconstruction. For Price, the historian can find nothing. At most, a das without any was. Was. Sorry.
That versus what?
Okay, sorry. He places prime value on the principle of analogy. It works well with regard to the traditional question of miracle, though Price recognizes that the principle cannot be related solely to our own current experience, and that particularly in the ancient world, many will have experienced miracles, that is, events that they could only understand as miracles. And he goes, as I will note in my response, and then he goes on. Is there a comment you can make based on that so far, or?
No, I don't know what problem he sees in my appeal to the principle of analogy.
There wasn't enough context there, huh?
Not in that.
I tried.
You might say, well, Price, didn't you read the thing? No, I've never read any of the responses to my article in that book. But I responded to Dunn's, and as I've said recently, noting with sorrow his passing, I've met him and I have very high regard for his work. But I think there's a place or two in his responses to mythicism that are really surprising. One of them is that he thinks, Wells, also sadly deceased now, said, why do the epistle writers never quote gospel materials? If not, the Gospels, they would say, have not been written yet. But if this is oral tradition that was then preserved in various documents, how come they don't seem to know it? And he said, well, there are sayings that kind of sound like the Sermon on the Mount. For instance, in Romans chapter 12, be not overcome with evil, but overcome evil with good. That kind of sounds like Jesus. Well, yeah. So if they're quoting Jesus, why don't they attribute it to him? I mean, surely that would drive home the point. And Dunn says, well, it would have been more convincing left as an allusion. Oh, he's talking about Jesus. That seems insanely foolish to me. And it shows that Wells was right. You better have some pretty good reason for this, and Dunn didn't. And I'm afraid it's an ad hoc hypothesis of the worst kind. Now, there are various things he's written that I highly prize. Like, I love his book, Jesus and the Spirit. I love his book, Unity and Diversity in the New Testament, and various other ones. I used to like his Baptism in the Holy Spirit book. I've some years ago now, come to think that the reasoning is a bit flawed in that one, but nonetheless, what a great scholar from whom much can be learned. But I don't think that he's right about people having refuted Drews and Wells or anybody else. There are a lot of the stuff is just giving these scholars the cold shoulder and saying, well, that's outrageous, outlandish, and that's no argument. And when Dunn does offer that argument, it is so lame that it just, I mean, I guess that's the best he could come up with, but it won't do.
That is interesting. Like, you have to pretend that you know why they wouldn't quote Jesus at that point. It's like complete speculation to say, well,
and implausible speculation. Why on earth would anybody not do this? I mean, when you say, look, this isn't just my view. The Son of God said it.
Yeah.
Surely you'd say that. So I don't want to leave people with the impression that I think he's some sort of a crank or like William Lane Craig. I have and had the greatest respect for Dunn. And he got more conservative in his later work, I think, but nonetheless, what a truly great scholar.
Makes me think, this whole quoting, what's being left out here on the Lord's Supper that Paul supposedly is quoting. If we take that as genuine, it still makes me scratch my head and go, well, why didn't they quote that and say, hey, we know for a fact that the Lord had a Last Supper with his disciples, things like that. It doesn't quite go into that kind of detail. Why wouldn't it? I mean, wouldn't that be important? I mean, does he touch on that as well and try to act like, well, this is evidence to prove that he did know of Jesus and stuff? Does he use the same arguments as sources do with the...
Well, historians do say that, because Bart really gives mythicists hell over the idea that they're engaged in what some call surgical exegesis, that if there are passages that seem to contradict your theory, you just say, well, that wasn't in the original, kind of like Warfield was doing from a fundamentalist standpoint. But I showed that with every one of the passages that mythicists suspect are additions, non-mythicists argued that first. I gave the names and the references to the works, that it wasn't mythicists who first suggested this. And suggesting it is not simply required by mythicism. And so, of course, no response to that. But that's, to me, that's mighty important. And often it doesn't really rest on that anyway. Like I was saying about that 1 Corinthians thing about the supper, according to Chaim Maccabee, for instance, in his book Paul and Hellenism, he's one of the ones that argues that this is from Paul, but he's talking about a vision. And then more recently, I read somebody's book who says, yeah, and it's not a vision of a narrative, as I was explaining before. And it seems to me that makes plenty of sense of it, even if it is by Paul. It's just like James, the brother of the Lord. That is simply not an open and shut case. He has to mean his biological brother. I don't see that, because there are other relevant uses of it, of the term brother. I don't agree with Richard Carrier's view that it just means Christian. Why not say that about everybody? But I think Wells is right that there's evidence that there were brothers of the Lord who were a group of missionaries, the least of these my brethren, and so forth. So we don't know that it means that, but it's certainly a toss-up. Are you going to rest the whole case for a historical Jesus on a possible meaning of that term? No way.